good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Whichever part of the world you are joining us from, the Global Council for the Promotion of International Trade welcomes you all for this exciting roundtable discussion on the topic circular economy and future of businesses. I am Ananya Banerjee Chatterjee, the R&D and Communication Officer for the CPIT and a host for the evening. The Global Council for Circular Economy and Future of Businesses has set in motion plans to organize a monthly roundtable discussion focusing on circular economy and future of businesses. The core aim of this forthcoming roundtable discussion would be gathering is to effectively share circular crucial insights pertaining to policies, practices, approaches, innovations, and collaboration in the realm of the circular economy. Global Council for Circular Economy and Future of Businesses, Government, and Civil Society to make a plan for a circular economy and push for big changes. Circular business models can help speed up the moves to a circular economy because they reduce the amount of waste that is made, promote collaborative participation for crucial circular success, encourage global leadership from business, government, civil society to speed up the change from a linear economy to a circular economy, which will help people, businesses, and the environment now and in the future. Addresses the most difficult obstacle to the circular economy with concrete solutions and actions so they can go further and fast together. In short, the waste of today becomes the raw materials of tomorrow. So let's begin with the discussion. Today we have five speakers with us who will share their knowledge and perspective on the topic circular economy and future of businesses. I will give a brief introduction of all these speakers. To start with, Mr. Syed Mubrak, Chief Sustainability Officer, Evo Labs Private Limited. Mr. Syed is a sustainability and technology veteran with over 30 years of proven experience in leading the change within organization to adopt technologies, innovations, business, process improvement. He has held several senior leadership positions in various organizations across Asia to lead diverse group of teams, overseas operations, and deliver multi-million dollar projects across commercial industry, hospitality, and corporate real estate assets. He has implemented several management systems such as ISO 9001, 18001, 45001, 55001 and 21021 to overcome operational challenges, improve quality, and eliminate waste. Welcome, Mr. Mubrak.
Hi, thank you, Ananya, for the introduction.
Next, we have Mr. Jonathan Ikolumba. He is a certified chartered accountant by training and worked across a range of organizations as finance and strategy consultant. He is very passionate about solving complex business problems and helping businesses build internal capabilities. His core area of specialization is on business analysis, financial management, and strategy, and that is gathered over 16 years of his experience. He is a regular commentator on local and international business topics, having featured across several radio, television, and social media stations in and out of Nigeria. He was featured as a speaker at the World Circular Economy Bank White Forum held in December 2022 at Kigali, speaking to an audience of over 40,000 attendees. Welcome, Mr. Ikolumba.
Thank you, Anaya, and thank you, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be joining this call all the way from Nigeria in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Dr. Herbert Mandla Moto, Chairman and Founder, Africa Entrepreneurs Network, Director General Africa GCPIT, Sustainable Media and Publishing, Editor, Transformative Africa magazine, also CEO of Total Business and Training Projects, South Africa, Executive Director, Jordan Touch Communication, Namibia, public speaker, author, material developer, and psychological counselor and mental health coach for business and life coach. Welcome, Mr. Moto.
Thank you, Ananya. Good morning, good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. Sunil David. He is an independent digital technology consultant with 29 years of experience in the IT and telecom industry. He currently is empaneled as an independent consultant in the manufacturing and process control practice area with Frost and Sullivan, India. He also advises an IoT and AI focused technology firm. Mr. Sunil was recently inducted as a mentor into T-Hub, Telangana Hub, one of the largest startup incubators in India, supporting some of the most innovative and disruptive startups in the world. He is very talented, where he is very frequently speaking in industry forums and leading educational institutions on topics related to IoT, AI, 5G, digital transformation, metaverse, and cyber security. Welcome, Mr. David.
Thank you, Ananya, for that introduction. Happy to be part of this roundtable.
Thank you. So now we will start with the question answers and would request all the speakers to share their perspective on all the questions. So to start with, my first question is, what is circular economy and why it is relevant to the future of businesses? And would request Mr. Mugraf to answer.
Hi, Ananya. Is the question to me?
No, yes.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I didn't
No
hear
problem.
clearly.
Do I need to repeat the question, sir?
No, it's okay. I understand the question. I think thank you for the very first question. It's very, very important. It's very basic. As the subject talks for circular economy, meaning that the current world, I mean post World War II to now, over 7 decades, we live in the take, make, and waste economy. It's more of a linear where we consume a lot of resources and of course we produce a lot of waste. At the same time, it also creates a lot of inconveniences. And one of the inconveniences what we are facing today is climate change. And almost 35 billion tons of carbon emitted globally on annual basis. And that is something we all need to work towards to mitigate the climate change, where circular economy plays a very important role in order to manage natural resources and how we can able to minimize harvesting natural resources and how we can use the existing ones. I think this is where the 3R principle comes in, like reduce, repurpose, and recycle. And as the subject talk about economy in circular concept, if anyone imagines that this could be anything between 3 to 5 trillion dollars economic possibilities, as the technology evolves, as the consumer adoption evolves, ultimately regulatory framework and manufacturing concepts are changes. I think this is going to create a lot of job opportunity while enabling sustainable development. Probably that in that context, I will stop it and let other speakers to chip in on this very basic question.
Thank you, Mr. Mugraf. I request all the speakers who wants to share or add something what Mr. Mugraf said. Mr. Hubbard, do you want to share?
I think what Mr. Barak said is quite very profound. I mean, in a nutshell, he is bringing an understanding that we do have to understand the benefits of a circular economy, since it is transformative, and the approach that it brings, I mean, is actually good than the linear economy, which is a take and make dispose. I mean, you look at in a linear economy, resources are extracted, transformed, and products then are used and ultimately discarded as waste, and which is the opposite of the circular economy. So this understanding, to anybody out there who's growing business, to government leaders, to the corporate world. I think it's quite a profound understanding whereby people need to understand the benefits and how they can look at both these two different types of economies and be able to see the advantages and the benefits that come along with them.
Thank you, Mr. Herbert. Mr. Jonathan, do you want to add something?
All right. Just to ride on what they've said, and I thought that was a profound way to sort of start the conversation. But just to add that, just some reality check that builds the case for this. So if you think about the way we live our life or the way humanity is designed, so our resources are quite limited, but the demand for the resources are unlimited. And that in itself also speaks to a growing consciousness on that match between, demand for resources and really how much resources, does exist. So I think the starting point for understanding the circular economy is that really it's a reorientation around the way we view resource usage. I like to think of the circular economy as an economic model that is essentially trying to address two things, right? So one for me is to optimize the use of resources, and then the other one is to minimize waste associated with these resources in such a manner that it doesn't come at an environmental cost or a social cost, by and large. So I think that the reality is that that's really the only way to sort of go, because there's a concept called intergenerational equity, and that really speaks to the fact that every generation owes the next generation, I think, the same access and the same rights to the quality of life that they've lived. So we sort of owe our generation that duty to be very responsible with our usage of the natural resources that has been endowed on us, and really a strong economic model to sort of drive that is really understanding the principles of the circular economy, which we've sort of touched a bit around, and really how it works. So I think that it's a moral burden on us to embrace the circular economy as much as it makes economic sense, that we sort of think about how we sort of optimize the usage of resources that is made available to humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Sunil, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure, Ananya. So just to take off from where Jonathan mentioned about optimum use of resources, right? I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas. So one is water. There are studies that show that by 2030, India might be a water-starved nation. There are a lot of areas where we might probably have severe water challenges. And there are other parts of the world also which might have those similar kind of challenges where groundwater is extracted significantly, and there are a lot of them dependent on the vagaries of the monsoon. And today, if we don't plan for ensuring that we manage our water resources well, then we are going to run into major challenges, right? Because whether you look at agriculture, even an industry, there's a lot of use of water. And the use of technology will play a big part. And I'll talk about it a little later in terms of how tech can really play a big part in how do you optimize water resources or water resources. The second thing is, we are going to also face a big challenge as it relates to food security, right? So the population of the world will probably touch about 10 billion in the next 20 years. And are we prepared to make food for such a big population? That's going to be a big question. A lot of the food that is prepared, a lot of them is wasted today. And a lot of them are wasted in the whole, the whole supply chain, right? So how do you use, again, tech to make sure that you are able to reduce food wastage or even convert food wastage into, say, biofuel, so this whole repurpose and recycling, that's going to be a big part. So I just wanted to add these two dimensions, the aspect related to water, how do you optimize it, and also related to the food security challenge that we might definitely face going forward. So those would be my initial comments on this topic. And circular economy is actually good for business, Ananya. I think no doubt about it. I think what is very clear is that organizations which are very sustainability focused, very clearly it is shown that their metrics in terms of revenues and profitability are definitely much better compared to those organizations who really haven't seriously taken sustainability. So those are my comments, Ananya. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. David. My next question is to Mr. Howard. Could you provide examples of successful circular economy strategies that business have implemented?
Sorry, come again. I was just
Yes.
distracted by
Okay,
something
no
here.
problem, no problem. Could you provide examples of successful circular economy strategies that businesses have implemented?
We do have quite a number, sorry, of them that have businesses have implemented. And I also like the fact that both the last speakers, Jonathan, drove on it, that um, since climate change is really affecting food store, and we really have to look at, we have become a consuming generation. We are not able to keep what we have. You look at some of the success stories that have come as a result of a circular economy, which are quite numerous to mention. I'll just touch on a few of them, able to look at it. We have things like resource recovery and recycling, which has been as a result of a circular economy, whereby materials and components are efficiently recovered and recycled. I think all over the world, in my travels in Africa, you see recycling has become the business. And a whole lot of people, when it started, people were not really looking at it as profitable. I mean, it was looked at as if you're picking up dirty, but we literally don't have much in terms of taking back what we're supposed to be throwing as waste and recycling them. Currently, there's a whole lot of, as a result of circular economy, digitalization and technology. These have become phenomenal in the sense of success and the impact that they're making. Digital marketing has become quite digital entrepreneurship. They've become quite huge in terms of the circular economy, whereby you'll see digitalization in terms of technology is playing a huge role in optimizing resources and management. At the same time, it's enabling and enabling tracking and helping on monitoring products through various means, their life cycle, and facilitating a business that is of good models. There's quite a number of them that are really coming up, just to mention just a few of them.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Mugab, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think, thanks. I think Herbert mentioned a lot of interesting facts. I'm going to take it from what Sunila said on the food and water, and particularly there are, to your question, I can look at the three different angles. One, from a business point of view, have been experienced throughout my life on various opportunities where I worked in across the Asia and India, and of course in some global level. One very specific to food, because the food waste is, globally almost 40% of food is wasted, while 1 billion people go to bed with no food, right? And as Sunil has addressed that 10 billion people, the world population could increase. Are we ready for, feeding all people with, no starvation and no hunger? So the organizations or companies, irrespective of any sector, and particularly hotel industry and tourism industry, has a huge potential in minimizing the food waste, and through responsible behavior, responsible consumption, and ultimately enabling repurposing it. Because if your food is not, you're going to consume it, you can able to donate to some other people who are highly needed. And then last but not least, recycling food waste means transforming the food waste into water, so that you can use that water for irrigation, toilet and other purposes, meaning that you could able to reduce water consumption from the natural resources, right? Then second one will be the food waste can convert into, already there are a lot of technology, hardcore engineering technology is available, transforming the food waste into fish food or biofuel. The biofuel can produce hot water, steam, or gas, that you can use even the gas to cook your own food, right? So that's is a kind of a circularity is enabled. So that is one angle of it. The second, actually I can look at from a government perspective, where regulatory policy changes can able to enable such a drastic move in circular economic point of view. One example I can say in Singapore, for example, like water safety, water security, and water sustainability is in the forefront almost 25 years ago. And the Singapore government has mandated policy that at least 60% of the water has to be produced locally, while we have been, importing water almost 100% in the past. So through that, in the last 2 decades, they built a lot of desalination plant, a lot of technologies in such that, water can be repurposed, properly, sanitized and repurposed for different applications. May not be for drinking purpose, but for all other industrial application, cooling and heating application, in many other aspects of it, the water can be repurposed. So in that context, Singapore can able to reduce the dependency on water importing. Right? I think these are the two key angles we can touch on it. And of course, there are many other ways to look at it from enabling circular economy across sectors. And that's one of the things very highly needed, irrespective of a developed country, developing country, and emerging countries.
Thank you, Mr. Mubarak. Mr. Jonathan, do you want to add something?
Okay, so I think we're speaking to case studies around successful applications of the circular economy. Before I touch on that, I think it's important to just sort of understand some of the things that would allow us to appreciate the various case studies will be to first of all understand what are some of the principles of the circular economy, or what are some of the business models, so that when I then give a case study, you can then understand how that then fits into an example of either a principle or a business model. So I think Coach has spoken about recycling. I had also spoken about resource recovery, but there are other circular business models. So for example, if you find that you can use inputs from a recycled material, so I'll call that circular inputs, or what I might call circular supply chains. So if your business is leveraging those things, that's an example as well of a circular business model. If you even do product sharing, or where you essentially do asset sharing as well too. So this idea around rental schemes and rental programs, right? It's also part of a circular business model. Or if you do what I would call product as a service, which is a concept where essentially the focus is really on the service portion of what you're offering as opposed to the product in itself, which also redefines the concept of ownership. So there are quite a couple. So let me take it to healthcare. So as a healthcare manufacturer, within the healthcare sector, so Philips is a big organization that produces a lot of healthcare electronics. And one of the things that Philips does is that they're able to support big hospitals and generally hospitals along with some sort of electronics or medical electronics schemes that essentially allows them to be able to lease those items to them, and the hospitals pay for a fee, and then the ownership of those electronics still sits with Philips. So that is in itself is also reducing the cost of using some of these items. And I think that has democratized access to healthcare infrastructures for many of the hospitals. I thought that was a good one. I know we have spoken about food, but I can take it to agriculture. So across Africa and across West Africa, from Nigeria to even parts of West Africa, lots of the agricultural systems that we run now is called integrated agriculture, where essentially there is no waste found within this agricultural system. So I'll give you a good example. So for example, now within the farms, you can have the concept of a fish pond. The water from the fish pond, every day is being repurposed. I think there's a noise from the background. I don't know where that is from. Okay. Can I go on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think that might be Coach Herbert. Might need to stay on mute.
Mr. Herbert, can you? Yes.
All right. Okay. So for example, I was given the concept of an integrated farm. So for example, many of the farms, that I work with here, even in Nigeria and even across West Africa, they could have a fish pond, the water that goes into the fish pond, every day after its usage is being repurposed back to the farm to support the crops. And even in terms of the crops, where you find animal husbandry. So within the farms as well, you find many of them also rearing animals. The manures from these animals also go directly to supporting the farms as well. So what you find in this concept, and even the farms also feed sometimes on some of the vegetations from the crop. So what you find is that there's no waste, right, within the sort of agricultural system that we are quite running. Let me give you another interesting aspect of the circular economy that we don't think about, and just to relate to what's happening here. The idea that technology in itself can support reusability of programs that we've had. So now we are recording this session, right? You know what can happen after this session? We can actually have the recordings of this session being shared, even perhaps being monetized for a fee. So what has happened is that everything we are sharing on this program is not lost, and we can always reuse this program. That in itself is also one application conversation. So you find where many learning and development professionals record their sessions, can always monetize the sessions after the live sessions have held. It's still part of the concept of circularity, ensuring that there's no waste around the events after it has happened. I think I just touched on 3 examples. I could speak on more, but let me allow others speak.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. Sunil, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So just a couple of things that Jonathan mentioned about now manufacturers offering product as a service. It's a very good model. In fact, Jonathan, you talked about Philips. I have another use case. So they are offering what's called light as a service, where they own all the light fixtures and they charge customers based on the actual light delivered. The customer doesn't own the asset. But I think that's a very good model. And there are many other manufacturers who are offering products as a service where the end customer don't own the asset. Because typically what happens is that people buy these assets and then once they finish using it, they kind of discard it, right? So good that manufacturers are offering this product as a service model. A couple of examples that I also want to share, Ananya, and that relates to what IKEA, well-known brand in the furniture side. So they have what is called the furniture take back and resale program. So people who want to kind of discard furniture, it comes back to IKEA, they kind of refurbish it and resold again. So that kind of reduces the waste and that increases the lifespan of the products. Another example that comes to my mind is H&M, a well-known, world-known retailer. Old clothes which are discarded by customers, they take it back, recycle it, and again, offered it back again. Customers don't want to buy it, they get a store credit. So that's another example that comes to my mind. Another example that comes to my mind is what Dell is doing, because one big challenge that we are facing today is electronic waste, right? Humongous amount of electronic waste is getting generated. People discard their old phones, their PCs, electronic gadgets. And here is Dell, what they're trying to do is taking back all those assets which are being discarded, recycling them. Some of those metals that are used are very, very precious, using the same thing to make new products, right? So Dell is doing a great job in terms of making sure that they are able to handle electronic waste effectively. And there are other manufacturers as well, like Toyota is also well known in the space of kind of recycling, taking back old vehicles and coming back with the newer models and so on and so forth. But these are the examples that come to my mind, Ananya.
Thank you, Mr. David. And my next question will be, can you please share how digital technologies are playing a big role in the circular economy and give us a few examples and request Mr. David to start with?
Yeah, sure. And this is something which is close to my heart because I am a digital technology evangelist. I live, breathe, and eat digital technology. So there are 4 important areas which I wanted to kind of highlight where technology will play a big part. And here I wanted to talk about food, especially as it relates to food wastage. I think the other speakers talked about so much of food being wasted, right? 40% of food being wasted. I wanted to give you an example of how AT&T, the company that I worked for before, in partnership with Emerson, was trying to address this problem about food wastage. A lot of the food wastage that is coming out of malls, restaurants and all that, a lot of them are dumped into landfills. And the moment you dump all this food waste into landfills, that creates a big environmental issue because that generates a lot of greenhouse gases. So here was AT&T working along with Emerson, where they converted all the food waste into one kind of a slurry, okay, in a tank. And using IoT sensors that will monitor the fill levels of the tank, you would have that particular tank being emptied. And that slurry is actually being taken, going through another process that converts into biofuel, which is a very good form of energy, another form of renewable energy. So that comes to my mind when you look at food systems. The second thing is manufactured goods and consumables. Now, most manufacturers, when they have all these machines, they really need to make sure that they are able to sweat all the assets, extracting the juice out of those assets. And one big challenge that the manufacturers face is that even before the life cycle of the product ends, they want to discard that. And thanks to technology today, you can use IoT in conjunction with artificial intelligence, where you can monitor these machines or any asset in real time, and you actually know in advance when the product might fail. And thanks to this technology, you can actually extend the life of some of these products. So that's number 2. Third is, what is called as the built environment, all the buildings, the malls, the airports, the physical infrastructure that we have built. There, I think one big use case is how do you regulate HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, right? Especially air conditioning, because air conditioners, when you run them, they generate a lot of CO2. And I just wanted to give you the example of a company that I consult, a project that they did in Changi Airport. Syed, this is a very interesting example. So in Changi Airport, there are about 280 gates. It might be even more, but this was the project that this company had executed about 3 years back. Now, Changi Airport, 280 gates. Now, what they have done is this company, they have integrated data which is coming in from the flight information and display system into a platform, and they're also integrated with the existing building management system, right? So what they have done is by integrating data coming in, especially from flight information and display system, they know exactly, using all this data, how to regulate the air conditioning. So as soon as the flight takes off, that gate is not operational for some certain period of time. They automatically switch off the air conditioner there. And maybe about an hour before a flight is taking off, they switch on their air conditioning, right? So on the basis of all this data coming in, using the power of IoT and AI, they're able to regulate the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and even lighting of all those gates. Huge savings in terms of energy. And there are lots of other buildings where they have actually deployed technology where they can reduce the amount of emission from air conditioners. You can regulate the use of air conditioners. Many times what happens is that some of these chillers, air handling units that are used as part of air conditioning systems, they have small anomalies which we don't detect it early. And even though small anomalies can cause an energy spike. And if you're able to use the power of AI to detect those anomalies early, then you can actually make sure that you can reduce that energy spike, right? So HVAC is one area where you can actually use the power of tech to really reduce your CO2 emissions. And the last example which I wanted to give is in the whole mobility and transport, right? Because in the supply chain side, moving from point A to point B, I have vehicles going. Simple things like doing route optimization, making sure that you have the shortest possible route to go from point A to point B. Tech will play a part there. And then monitoring the cold chain of all products which are going, especially temperature and humidity sensitive items. Many times, because you don't have technology to regulate cold chain, a lot of that becomes unusable. So thanks to tech, you can monitor it in real time. Any temperature excursion can be reported. You can take corrective action immediately. Even simple things like monitoring driver behavior, because how a driver drives, how he accelerates, how he brakes, that has an impact on fuel consumption. And if you're able to monitor the driver behavior, thanks to telematic devices, you can monitor that in real time, and you can actually build a driver scorecard, classifying somebody as a safe driver or a rash driver. And using the driving behavior, you can actually tell him that he's not driving efficiently. And so even things like that can make an impact. And if he drives well, he can actually make sure that his fuel is efficiency is a little better. Right. So these are examples which I just wanted to highlight in terms of how tech, IoT, AI, and all that can really play a part. And last thing which I just wanted to highlight before we move on, the use of 3D printing, Ananya, because what happens is that many small parts today, you really don't need to get it done, manufactured through the regular process. You can actually use the 3D printers to make smaller parts. I think that also, from a tech standpoint, can definitely play a big part in the whole circular economy. I'll stop here. I can go on, but these are examples which I just wanted to highlight.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Mugrak, your take on this?
Can I? Okay.
Yeah. You
go ahead, John.
You can. John,
oh, okay. I mean, that was very profound from Sunil. He really captured a lot of use case. I just wanted to add one, and then I'll yield the floor to the others. That is about the power of blockchain. So blockchain technology can also play a very major part. And I'll just give you two use cases. One of the powerful features of the blockchain is this concept of transparency. Traceability. So with blockchain, it becomes very transparent to understand the supply chain around, most of the items or most of the inputs that we use. So it's easy for us to then track, right? Using the blockchain technology, sources of inputs of some of the items that we use. So that in itself, that visibility that it gives to our supply chain, blockchain is one powerful technology, and that in itself helps to sort of understand, for example, the origin of some of the resources we've used, how they've been reused over time. We're able to track that. We can also use it to also reward what I might call good behavior. So for example, with blockchain, you can do tokenization. So I think there's a company called Plastic Bank. I want us to check about them. There's a company called Plastic Bank that sort of rewards offers plastic tokens for every plastic that's being collected, right? So you could also use, that tokenization aspect, right, to also reward, incentivize people to come up with activities or to engender practices that ensures that we can reuse items in itself. So I just wanted to say that blockchain is also a very powerful technology in addition to what Sini is saying to drive secular practices. So I'm happy to yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. Nuvrat, you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think I'm going to build upon what Sunil and Jonathan has mentioned. And of course, the digital technology has been an enabler almost for the last 2 to 3 decades. And of course, in the recent years, of course, with the blockchain and other technologies really playing an important role. And Sunil has spoken a lot about IoT built environment. And almost I live and breathe in the built environment for more than 2 decades. Small scale to large scale. My last corporate job was almost managing 30 million square feet of built environment space. So exactly that IoT digital platform, data analytics, automated fault detection, right, which helps in managing the asset very efficiently. I'll give you an example, like a built environment. I mean, the building sector globally consumes almost 37% of energy and 34% of carbon production, both from embodied carbon to the operational carbon and disposable carbon that we call total life cycle carbon. So the technology can play an important role from reducing embodied carbon, making sure that the steel structure, concrete, MEP material, all kind of material procured or sustainably procured. That means it has a renewable or recycled content in it, right? That how to validate it, that's where the blockchain can come in. Proper traceability of the material harvest or how much material being really recycled in the manufacturing processes, so that can be stored in the in the database when real estate developer or facility managers procuring the material. So that's one way aspect of it. Second, from an operational point of view, there is a lot of technique and technologies can be enabled so that it can reduce anything between 15% to 50% energy efficiency improvement equally is a carbon reduction. So we are talking about sustainable development and circular enabling circularity, right? And the contrary, I think again going back to the food waste, right, and responsible behavior, and that's where the technology can play important role. For example, there are solution available with the computer vision camera. So if to reduce the food waste in the kitchen, that is we call prop waste, and also reduce food waste in the downstream, that is the consumer food waste. So you can put this camera enabled machinery. So when you dump the waste inside, basically it detects and also gives you the output that how much rice is wasted, how much noodle wasted, how much chicken is wasted. So it gives you the proportion. So that will also help you to understand what kind of food is wasted and how you can institute a mechanism that in order to engage stakeholders, whether it's a visitor who consumes the food in the restaurant or an employee consumes the food through the team member dining in a hotel environment or resort environment. And then you can able to engage people to change behavior. That is exactly SDG 12, responsible consumption, right? Whether it's waste or water or energy, all connected together, where the technology can play a crucial role, and making sure that technology is enabled in a right manner, and really that helps people to transform. I think with that, I really stop here, because if we talk about technology, there are many things we can continue to talk.
Yeah.
Probably the time may not be enough, and I let Coach Herbert to chip in on this aspect.
Thank you, Mr. Mubarak. Mr. Herbert, your take on this? Mr. Herbert, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I think he's not able. Mr. Herbert, your take on this? Can you please share your perspective as well? Okay. So my next question will be, What are some challenges that business might face when transitioning to a circular economy model? And would request Mr. Jonathan to answer.
Oh, that's great. So there are a couple of them, and I know we're going to do justice to that, but let me touch with I might range them into internal and external sort of challenges. So in no particular order, I think one big sort of challenge, especially taking a lens from what I see in Africa here, could be even around user perception. So let's take, for instance, recycled items. Sometimes there's that sort of managing the user perception around how they look at recycled items. So for example, if we went for a trade exhibition and I had a banner that said, look, I'm into recycled items, versus another sort of exhibitor who's showing items that are virgin resources or quite brand new. I think that there could be that perception around recycled items being of lower quality than new items. So I think that in itself might speak to things like education, right? So we need to also support in educating, our clients and our consumers and our customers, around really what resources or how to approach resources, and that it matters not whether a resource has been recycled or if it is made from virgin items. So I think that's one challenge. I also think regulations is also another big one. So for example, in many parts of the world, so there's a growing call for what I would call extended producer responsibilities, EPR, that sort of still places the responsibility on manufacturers and producers to still, be held account for, what I might call the recovery of some of their products, even after they've been consumed by the customers. So I think more of those kind of regulations are quite needed, even regulations from tax perspective. So for example, in Nigeria, we signed into law recently what I call a green tax, a green tax law that sort of, puts a lot of that gives a lot of tax credits to businesses that are going to make committed efforts around recycling and just ensuring that we can limit a single use of some of the items that are being produced. So I think that's another sort of major one. So I think that's also another big challenge is really around unlocking the ecosystem. So collaboration is one very strong factor to building a circular economy globally, and not just even from the perspective of what one entity is doing. So the idea that even a resource that is deemed or a waste from one sector could also be an input into another sector requires that there's a lot of collaboration and joint, what I might call joint value creation that needs to start happening. So I think another challenge is to what extent are we all unlocking, or do business unlock their value chain? And if you sort of look at how, understanding your value chain and collaborations can sort of amplify that, I think that's also another big challenge. I think I'll leave it at these three, so I allow other people to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. Sunil, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I think just to add a few more which come to my mind. Initial investment costs might be.
Sunil sir, we are not able to hear you.
Yeah, we're not able to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay. So one is, I think, financial cost. There might be a higher upfront financial cost that might be there. Second thing is you got to change your business model from a linear model to a circular model. And that would require a lot of internal buy-in. You're used to a certain process. And, the biggest barrier today would be change management. How do you get everybody aligned to that? So that could be another potential challenge in making sure that you get all aligned to the larger vision. Third is, I think, very importantly, the consumer acceptance and behavior. Getting the consumers to accept that for brands, I think a lot more awareness that they need to create among consumers about the benefits of circularity, and hence trying to drive the change among consumers. And I think what Jonathan mentioned earlier, regulatory compliance. Each country has got its own nuances around how do you manage it. And especially if it's a global company trying to do that at global scale, it might be a challenge. So these are things that I just wanted to call out, Ananya.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Mugrak, your take on this?
Yeah, sure. I think Jonathan and Sunil have touched a lot of things on this, but I would like to address in a different context that historically, recycling business has always been a very unsustainable it's not very profitable in order for the business to continue to run for many reasons, including there are policy breaks between jurisdictions. So in my point of view, in order to overcome the challenges and put the circular economy in the right context, there are a few key elements are required. One is a commitment from the key stakeholders, particularly in a businesses from the top down, commitment from the government policymakers, commitment from the civic bodies, right? Number one. Number two, enabling affordable technology. I mean, access to technology and an affordable cost, because that is, again, there is a lot of gaps between developed countries to the developing and emerging nations. Third will be the behavioral change issues, which Sunil has mentioned. I mean, we are still having this challenge of responsible behavior, whether it's a top-down or bottom-up grassroots level. I think that need to be enabled through proper education, engagement, raising awareness, and bringing technology to change behavior, right? Then the last but not least, of course, regulatory requirement is needed. The fifth one, I would address that very, very important, access to finance. So enabling finance to facilitate circular economy concept. The financing can come from government grants or subsidies or private investor. And on the contrary, even a big corporations can able to help SMEs who want to pursue innovating on the circular economy or recycling industry. I think they can come together, come hands together in order to promote circular economy. So if we address these 5 key elements, possibly we can able to overcome the challenges with the circular economy. As I mentioned in the beginning, probably an opportunity to unlock more than a $4 trillion economic benefits through circular fundamentals in the decades to come.
Thank you, Mr. Mudra. Mr. Howard, your take on this?
He needs to unmute his mic.
Please unmute yourself, Mr. Howard.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much. I think what the speakers, they've spoken quite extensively around that, but you also look at just 2 things I wanted to mention around that: the consumer behavior and the supply chain complexity of the whole issue around change. I mean, the process of encouraging consumers to embrace the circular consumption patterns, it just as they both mentioned, it brings in a whole lot of costing in terms of making sure the embracing and the changing. Consumers have always a change of attitude towards something that is changing. Example I can give: renting or sharing products can be challenging, and consumers mostly in unfamiliarity with these models, they slowly adopt. It will not be an instant adoption, and supply chain complexity is also another thing that probably we need to look at as a challenge, whereby we get to have building circular supply chains and that prioritize in a whole lot of the reuse and recycling, which was mentioned earlier on. So these 2, I think it's something that has to be looked at. I was in a meeting just interestingly around this. Somebody said the coming artificial intelligence is going to leave a lot of people jobless. I mean, these are some of the changes that are currently going on. And then the professor was saying, literally, I think we're going to have a lot of jobs created because of artificial intelligence. It is how we adopt and embrace and make it work for us. But I think everybody is gripped with the fear of losing their jobs. It is how we navigate around these changes that I also think is very important. Thank you, Anand.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. My next question is, how important is collaboration among business, government, and consumer in driving the adoption of circular economy practices? And I request Mr. Murak to start with.
All right. So I think the word itself speaks for collaboration. So in today's economy, where we live on eco model, meaning that many stakeholders can come together in solving the big problem, because it's not a one person or one company or one government are able to solve the world problem we are facing today. At least there are many issues. If you look at the World Economic Forum report annually, at least the top two threats come to in the forefront is climate change and cybersecurity, right? In order to overcome this, of course, from the climate change point of view, that's where the circular economy, plays one of the very important, one of the very important aspect where government need to be a part of the ecosystem because the government plays the policy, a regulatory framework. Then the businesses come into the picture in order to enable resources. The third will be the civic bodies or NGOs can come and play a very important role. And last but not least, people, because two hands can make a noise, right? One hand can't make it. So it has to be, twofold, and I would say it's a multi-fold approach. We call it all hands together in order to overcome this challenge. So collaborative approach is very, very important so that the lessons can be learned and we do not need to reinvent the wheel. So what I learned in one sector can be scaled up because now we are talking about scaling up from POC, POV, and how we can scale the model so that it can be create a more value creation and enabling sustainable development. I think that's the whole idea of collaborative model, and that is exactly needed for a circular economy in the context of overcoming energy challenges, water scarcity, and eliminating food waste, so that we have a better ecosystem, better future for everyone moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Murat. Mr. Jonathan, your take on this, please.
Yeah, I did allude to the fact that one of the principles, and I'm not sure we've had the time to speak to this. So we have what we call the principles of the circular economy. Popularly, a couple of organizations have been promoting that. And one of that is this idea around joint value creation, which also requires collaboration with stakeholders. And so it's critical. It's an essential part of building the circular economy or strengthening the transition to the circular economy. And there's so many reasons why we can appreciate that. For example, I did say that, the waste from one sector or from one business could also be an input to another business. I'll give you an example what happens in Nigeria here. So so tissue, I don't know what you call it, but we call it tissue paper. This toilet rolls are being produced from the waste that comes from paper production companies. So what we find in Nigeria is that there's a deliberate effort by the government to ensure that in areas, so we have clusters where we have paper printing, right? And so there's a deliberate effort to ensure that these paper printing companies do work together with these tissue manufacturers such that they pick up their waste directly. The same even happens with our newsprint magazines as well too. So those who do heavy paper printing works deliberately with those who prepare who produce this tissue and then facilitating that. So I think policy is that connection in itself that can also ensure that there's collaboration and that there's an incentive that we're also rewarding, this sort of collaborations. Like I said, it could be through policies that, so for example, like tax credits, is one of the things we do here, to encourage some of these collaborations that are happening. I think another thing that will also strengthen collaboration too is also advocacy, so when we have sessions like this, we're all speaking to ourselves, and this needs to even happen. So one of the things we try to do, I'm very big on advocacy around the circular economy here in Nigeria, is we sort of try to even distill it on a sectoral basis. So we hold conversations. For example, I'm working a lot with fashion businesses and fashion brands in Nigeria, speaking to because fashion is really a big emitter of waste. I think if you take away food, the next big emitter of waste you find globally is around, textile, fashion, and all of that. So we're speaking to those sectors. What can you do with your waste? How can you collaborate, amongst yourselves, even, sort of collaboration even among competitors to sort of optimize, their waste. We are doing that. So I think
I think there's some problem.
Can I come through also there?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
I like what Jonathan was talking about in terms of collaboration, how it impacts. But as he was speaking, and I was having a question at the back of my mind. Sorry to be a little bit blunt, but yeah, that's the reality. Are governments in the world, probably namely in Africa, ready for collaboration? If you listen to what Jonathan has said, I mean, that's the question. I mean, I'm of the opinion either the corporate world, the NGO sector are keen on collaboration. But if you listen to what Jonathan said, that is where it is important, where we need to look at the gains of collaboration, resource efficiency. I mean, benefits both. It's a win-win to all. Now, collaboration will definitely enable efficient use of resources by aligning the efforts to all stakeholders. And actually, business is good. And one of the things that collaboration does, it grows the economy because resources are being aligned and efforts of everybody getting the resources are actually in place. And businesses can work together. When I'm talking of businesses, the governments in Africa and optimize the supply chains. And governments can implement supportive policies, and also they can do regulations, and consumers can have and make choices that reduce the source of waste. That's something Jonathan touched on. We do have a whole lot of waste that can actually benefit out of this collaboration. We also look at closed loop systems, which are also, as a result, can be beneficial of collaboration. The circular economy relies on closed loopholes where materials and products are just continuously reused, refurbished, or recycled. Achieving this level of circular economy circularity requires seamless collaboration. But I still live with the question, are our governments in Africa ready for collaboration?
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. David, your take on this?
Yeah, so just to add to what all the other speakers have said, you talked about government, you talked about businesses, and you talked about consumers. I think it's also very important to collaborate with the academia, right? I think within academic institutions, very important to have courses that are focused on sustainability and circular economy.
Yeah.
That is very critical. And some of the biggest startups that have been incubated have come out from big academic institutions, right? And and that leads me to the next point about also for businesses to kind of collaborate with even some of the niche solution products, even some of the startups, because some of these startups have some very good solutions as it relates to sustainability and circularity. And in this context, I just wanted to give you an example of how during the COVID first wave 2020, there is a startup in Hyderabad called Statwig, which is incubated out of T-Hub. T-Hub is one of India's largest startup incubators, and I'm a mentor to T-Hub. And this particular startup called Statwig had built a blockchain ledger to identify spurious and expired vaccines, right? So during that COVID time, when vaccines were being distributed and all these vaccines have to be maintained at a particular temperature, there was this challenge where many spurious vaccines were being sold, vaccines that had expired, which loses its efficacy, obviously, right? And here was a company which got contracted with a well-known global organization at that point in time called Gavi, Global Association for Vaccine Immunization. They collaborated with the startup to build that blockchain ledger that will be able to trace vaccines right from the point of origination to the point of destination. So definitely, I think collaborating with these startups along with businesses would also be a good option to look at, apart from academia, Ananya.
Thank you, Mr. David. So my next question will be, can you please elaborate on the role of consumer awareness and education playing a part in the success of circular economy initiatives? And we request Mr. David to start with.
It's for me, right? So I think the first and foremost thing, Ananya, is that one has to create a demand for such circular products and services. Invest a lot of time and effort from the brands to create that awareness among consumers. And I'll just take the example of India. India has got a very young population, almost anywhere between 15 to 35. We have about 200 million people in that bracket. And the younger population, the whole demographics has changed so much. They are a lot more conscious about the environment. Okay. They want to relate to brands who are conscious about environmental sustainability, right? So I think creating that awareness among consumers is going to be very, very important. That's number one. Second thing, what is also equally important is to drive behavior change, which is the toughest part. How do you change mindset? How do you change consumer behavior to make sure that they kind of work with brands, especially in the area of circular, and getting them to participate in this whole circular models. I think those are points which I just wanted to highlight: the need for creating demand for it, behavior change, and getting them to participate in circular models. So this would be my take, Ananya, on this.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Jonathan, your take on this?
Yeah, in addition to the beautiful thing he said, I also think that, so yes, driving the demand is good, but I also think as well too is that the fact that we are doing repurposing or recycling or doing a circular practice shouldn't also mean that we reduce the quality. So for example, we speak about recycling. I like to speak a bit more about upcycling, which is really, when you recycle to create something of a higher quality. So I also think that as much as we are making a push, advocating, for circular practice, we must never compromise on quality because that is also important to getting the customer buy-in. So I would just say that, one of the things, consumer education is good, but I think that the more we innovate around creating high quality products that are in line with circular practices, I think it just makes it a very seamless experience to be able to pass on the message of circularity to the consumers. So I think we must never compromise on quality. In fact, the onus or the imperative might be that to transition to circular economy, we've got to ensure that, the quality products, quality service offerings, should actually should be paramount, to those who will be producing items that should feed a circular economy.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. Mugrab, your perspective, please.
I think as we speak about circular economy and engaging stakeholder in order to make or drive change, I think I look at three key areas. One is sustainable tourism, sustainable fashion, and sustainable food. And you'll be surprised, all three has a huge impact if it is driven properly, then in reducing carbon footprint. Sustainable fashion, I know Jonathan has mentioned about it, is almost responsible for 3 billion tons of carbon emission globally. So, and Sunil has mentioned, almost globally, there is a younger population. I mean, there's Gen Z and Zillennials, right? They are very health conscious and of course, environmental conscious. And Ashiv, if we can able to build a mechanism very tightly, and the manufacturers and policies and programs are properly in place and technology is enabled. So I think that's where the huge opportunity for driving change in the fashion industry and promoting sustainability within the fashion industry, reduce waste, reduce carbon footprint, of course, can minimize a lot of water usages, chemical usages, and all kind of stuff. Second, on the food, I think again we go back to the fundamental, because for us to live in this world, there are three key items we need, and one is about food. So we need to conserve food, we need to be sustainably consume food, and we should avoid food that consumes a lot of energy, a lot of waste. For example, like I'm not against the non-vegetarian, but again, the way how you can consume food is matters. For example, we are consuming a lot of beef. For example, beef, if it is not naturally produced, but it is a manufactured beef, that consumes a lot of energy. From a production point of view, and storage, that is a freezing point of view, and of course the transportation, and ultimately you have to thaw the beef, and then you have to cook it, and then you consume it. So that's how, of course, transforming it to vegetarian, vegan, possibly could enable, less waste production, and that's again a way to engage consumer. Third will be on the, I think I touched tourism, because the tourism accountable for 10% of global carbon footprint. And a lot of younger generation, people are willing to have a good place, of course, at the same time that is sustainable in nature. The hotel facility, surrounding hotel facility can be in sustainable nature. And then that's where the tourism and hospitality has a huge potential, a huge responsibility in promoting sustainable tourism in order to mitigate carbon footprint. At the same time, it can generate more economic benefits to the ecosystem.
Thank you, Mr. Mugrab. Mr. Howard, do you want to add something? Please unmute yourself.
I wanted to add on what Jonathan and him just spoke about. I think looking at tourism at the booming of it, I think it's a global industry, but what role does the consumer play around this? I like the statement that Jonathan mentioned. In the midst of all this, as we transition to secular economy, I think we need to maintain the quality of the product. There are two things that are going to be at play here. That is driving demand and market influence. But if you look at both the two, the consumers are directly involved. But one thing that is important is the end product. They're looking at the quality. Consumers can bring an awareness, I mean, environmentally and in terms of the economic benefits of the products. But at the same time, they will not be able to ignore the quality. So as much as there is a business boom. Suppose, let me give an example in the tourism sector. But the consumers themselves, they are still very conscious and very particular about the product. So the quality is important. There is going to be, through the awareness of the consumers, driving demand and market influence, which are very critical in the growing of the circular economy. Thank you so much, Ananya.
Thank you, Mr. Herbert.
Ananya, before you move, just to one point which I wanted to add, and I just wanted to give an example, and Syed had mentioned about sustainable fashion. I just wanted to give an example of a startup, a founder of a startup whom I know. She formed this company called eCloset based in India. And what they do is, see, many of us have some of our old clothes which are just in the closet. You're not using it. You know what she does? She reaches out to some of these customers and asks them if they have clothes which they're not using. And then, of course, they make sure that it is clean and it's usable and all that. And they rent it out to people who want to take clothes as a service. That's a nice model where, people who are not using their old shirts, pants, or whatever that what women use, they rent it out. So it's offering like clothes as a service. So I think that's a good model, especially in context of fashion and clothes. And I just wanted to give that example.
Thank you, Mr. David. And my next question is, what are some practical steps that small and large businesses can take to start integrating circular economy principles in their operations? And would request Mr. Herbert to answer first.
Sorry, come again, Ananya, are you talking to me?
Yes. So do you want me to repeat the question?
Yes, thank you. There was some noise in the background. I lost you a little bit there.
What are some practical steps that small and large businesses can take to start integrating circular economy principles in their operations?
Yeah, I think that's a very important aspect as small startups start integrating steps that they would be able to take, and this is important because it also grows into their business growing. I think one of the things that I would like to drive on is the visibility. I think as these startups are starting, many complain about competition from already either world-renowned, already established business services, be it in the food sector, be it in the tourism, be it in the IT world. But the question that I've always asked, how visible are you? I mean, we are living in a generation where internet plays a huge part. I remember Jonathan saying, this platform, which we are having today, can also be used at another level, and giving an example, GCP can generate cash through this platform. So, I mean, we are here and we are reaching out to the world. I think visibility is of extreme importance. As one of the steps that I'm just dwelling on, how visible are you? How visible is your product? Your mantra, who knows about it? Because it's not just about wanting your products, being out in the world, is as in people knowing it, but the visibility. And visibility does not just come by itself. You also can deliberately create visibility. And also one way of creating visibility as a startup, you also need to collaborate. There's need for networking. I mean, it's incredible. We're living in a world where you can't say you're brilliant, you're skilled laborers, you're smart, but you don't have networking, you don't have any collaboration, and you're not visible. How then are you going to grow as a business entity? I think with those, I can leave the other for the others to come through.
Thank you, Mr. Herbert. Mr. Jonathan, your take on this?
Okay, so what I think I would do to sort of speak to your question would be to highlight what are the principles of a circular economy. And you see that if a business decides to adopt any of these principles, then they're integrating it already to their operations. So let me just list a couple. So for example, one is really being futuristic in the design of your product or services, meaning we say design for the future. So one of the ways that you can sort of, incorporate the circular economy or integrate it into your operations is to be very futuristic. The circular economy, I did say around resource optimization, which really is designing products or services for longevity. So if that's something that is quite at the heart of a business operation, that whatever product offering or service offering that we're going to be putting out should be able to at least, serve for a very long period. That in itself is integrating circular economy into your operations, right? Another principle of the circular economy, which we sort of spoke about, was incorporating digital technology, this idea around harnessing any sort of technology, especially because technology allows us to scale. Right? Technology allows us to scale, grow our businesses with limited cost to the environment. I mean, a good example is, I could have had to travel to India to be on a call like this, but I'm here on a call and I'm meeting fantastic people from all over the world, right? So anyway, we sort of, incorporate digital technology, I think that's a fantastic way to start thinking around the idea of we or businesses, embracing circularity. I've spoken about collaboration. That's a strong part of principle of the circular economy. Finding out how you can collaborate to be able to create more value is one. Another one is really this idea of thinking around your waste, right? How can you use waste, as a resource, right? I did say that one of the circular business models is to be able to leverage off what I would call a circular supply chain. So you could stay committed as a business to say, look, maybe I don't have any direct need, to reuse an item, but if I can patronize, for example, in many parts of Nigeria where I come from, you find paintings or artworks, artifacts that are made from recycled items. So that could be something you do as a business, that you would patronize businesses that do recycling or that repurpose materials as well. That could be something you could decide to do. That in itself is integrating circularity into your operations. I'll speak on two more. Another one I wanted to speak on is this idea around finding out ways to preserve what is already used. Right. So I like the idea. I think someone was speaking about a furniture company, or someone also gave an example around a startup that can request for a waste for some of the clothes back, and incentivize people for that. So if you find out ways you can preserve what you're currently doing, and this can be things like upgrading, so rather than doing a brand new purchase of every item, can you find out how you can upgrade some of these items? Can you find out how you can repair? So upgrade, repair are some of the ways you can sort of, embrace that. Then I think one of the things I wanted to speak on again, and in wrapping up, is this idea around prioritizing natural resources in your business, or resources that are regenerative. I like the idea around embracing renewable energy, clean energy. That's a fantastic way, especially in this global call to sort of transit, this energy transition to cleaner energy. So I think if you can go for renewables, if you can go for things that are natural, regenerating in nature, I think that's a fantastic way for businesses to embrace that. So let's move to clean energy. I think that's a fantastic commitment we can all make.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. David, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. So just taking off from where Jonathan mentioned about product design, right? So I think there's a lot of innovation that can be done in product design. And how do you build products taking into consideration circularity and sustainability? So there, I think a lot more research needs to be done in terms of materials that are used to create products. For example, a lot of research and innovation is happening in the area of nanomaterials. So nanomaterials are, it's 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter, very, very small. But some of these nano materials, when you add to existing products, they can actually increase the strength, make them a lot more lighter and so on, right? So in terms of innovation and product design, how do you design these products, taking into consideration, making it, also factoring the recyclability, repairability, those are important aspects. And second thing is, again, just going back to the point of offering products as a service. I think, innovation and business models, and I think there are enough and more examples of how companies are now increasingly wanting to offer products as a service, in terms of making sure that they have a lot more stickiness with their customers when they offer such models. So these are the two things we just wanted to call out, Ananya.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Mugrab, your perspective on this, please.
Thank you, Ananya. I think I would like to touch in a different context. Sunil, Herbert, and Jonathan spoken heavily on many aspects. The question is all about how companies can embrace circularity, right? Whether it's MSME or MNC, it doesn't really matter. The fundamental is actually that they have to measure the impact in order to drive change. So if you don't measure what you don't measure, you can't manage it. That's what Peter Drucker said, right? So I think the first and foremost step is the companies, whether it's a manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality, supply chain, industrial, they have to start measure it and then identify how the processes are there and what are the waste they generate and how they can improve the processes to reduce waste, or where they can bring technology to enable change, ultimately can bring the circularity principle in it. For example, if a company making a lot of waste, and how they can transform the waste into one form of energy or another form of product that can be used for their own application, or it could be sold as a product in the market. So that means the consumer can procure it instead of those products manufactured through virgin material. I think that is exactly what the companies has to do it. Of course, here the collaboration plays a very important role. As Sunil has mentioned that, that there are a lot of startups comes with a lot of interesting ideas, but the MNCs, can play a vital role in connecting the dots and enabling, creating them, giving them a space and for them to scale up. I think that's where the businesses and the new ideas can grow to enable circularity.
Thank you, Mr. Mugrab. My next question is, how can businesses measure and quantify the positive environmental and economic impact of transitioning to a circular economy? And I will request Mr. Mugrab to answer to start with.
All right. So I think it's really good you mentioned about measure. I think that's exactly what I mentioned about in the earlier question. Measurement is important. So in the context of circularity, now we go back to the concept of ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance, sustainability reporting for organizations to report their carbon footprint. That is scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, right? And particularly scope 3, which addresses a lot of 15 different items, both downstream and upstream aspect of it. Waste, or the type of material they use or type of material procured, is a part of the scope 3 emission of many companies. And that is one of the biggest challenge at this point in time, even from measurement point of view and a reporting point of view. So where the technology can play an important role, as we discussed in the early part of this call, that how the digitalization or blockchain or IoT can help in tracking the overall carbon footprint of the product from the harvesting to the disposal, and that can be tracked, reported in a transparent manner. And with that, the companies can take action to reduce their carbon footprint, particularly a scope 3. That will help on some companies in a scope 1 and scope 2. For example, a manufacturing company who procure a lot of cement or steel or coffee, rubber, right? That is their scope 3 emission. But if they can enable opportunity for MSMEs who produce rubber, all those material, and that will be their scope 1, scope 2 emission. So it is as a chain of reaction. If all things are properly mandated, proper policies and programs are put in place. Having said that, there are two key policies already, being in the market right now from Europe. One is called European Union Deforest Regulation, that is, try to minimize the deforestation on rubber, cocoa, coffee, and many other products. Another one called CBAM, that is carbon-based adjustment mechanism, carbon border adjustment mechanism. That is mainly on the steel, concrete, and other high carbon intensive equipments or products. So hopefully, I think this will play important role from measurement point of view and making a positive impact.
Thank you, Mr. Murat. Mr. Jonathan, your take on this, please.
Okay. I think when it comes to measuring circularity, there are a couple, first of all, the point is that there are a lot of measurement tools that are out there. I know that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has a tool called Circulytics. My firm is subscribed on that. Circulytics that sort of allows, and this is a free tool, by the way, and they've got a couple of indicators across several resources, from water to energy to waste disposal, quite a couple of metrics. And I do know that there are quite a lot of other free, circular impact measurement tools. So I think the critical thing across all of these tools that I've seen, I've worked with two of these tools, is, defining, what the circular objectives are, the circular economy objectives for your firms are, and then that forms the basis for some of the things to be tracking. But the very common areas that they sort of tend to measure will be around most of the natural resources that you sort of use within your firm. So I've spoken about water, how much you use water, how much you sort of reuse water as well too. Then there's also energy as well too, and then there's waste disposal. I think those are the three ones. And sometimes there's also this thing around plastics, how much, single plastic usage, or how do you discourage single plastic usage. So there's a very detailed measurement tool that I see, but there are a couple of free tools that are out there, and they focus on, they sort of tie it to the objective you set. So you set an objective for what your circular impact will be, and then they come up with KPIs that you sort of can feed in the data around what is happening. I think that's what I would be able to say to that.
Thank you, Mr. Jonathan. Mr. David, your take on this, please.
Yeah, sure, Ananya. So just taking off from where Syed mentioned about ESG, environmental, social, and governance. So I think what is very important for organizations to realize that one should not look at ESG only from a compliance standpoint and just put a tick box. I think that is not going to work. In India, in the stock market, the top 1,000 companies in terms of market cap as part of the Sensex, they have, from this financial year, have to report ESG. What are their targets, and where are they in terms of meeting those targets? So that's a good start. But I think what is very important is to kind of drive a sustainability culture within the organization that kind of permeates across the entire organization, across all functions. And what I've also observed is that even in India, and I'm going to give you only India examples here, but a lot of even the bigger companies, very few of them have chief sustainability officers. I think with this kind of focus on ESG, I think it's very important for organizations to have someone who would only focus on this area. I think it's a good start to have chief sustainability officers. Pretty much every organization should have a title like that, who would work with all the important stakeholders to really drive change. And again, what Syed mentioned about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, scope 1 and scope 2, to a certain extent, it's in your control. But when you look at scope 3, it is beyond your supply chain. And there it becomes a lot more challenging, right? And so there, I think it's very important to get that the whole ecosystem to work together. Again, goes back to the point on collaboration, right? How do you get everybody in a collaborative manner work towards this whole aspect on sustainability, right? I think that's just what I wanted to add, Anya, in addition to what the others said.
Thank you, Mr. David. Mr. Howard, do you want to add something? You are on mute.
Just to add on some of them that they spoke about, there's what we call economic metrics, which has some sub-components, which I think are very important around revenue from circular collection initiatives as a way of measuring, whereby you track the revenue generated from the circular business models, and such as a product as a service or remanufacturing services. I think Jonathan touched on the waste products aspect. And then there's also cost saving, where you look at the quality cost savings and achieved through waste reduction. He also touched on that. So there's quite a number of them. And there's also environmental impact assess impact metrics, which has got the greenhouse emissions, which are some of the way of measuring that can be used in a circular, which are very important.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And with this, we come to an end. So, as we near the end of this roundtable discussion, I would like to first express my heartfelt thanks to all the speakers who have taken time from their busy schedule and shared their in-depth knowledge with us. And thank you so much, DCPIT, and to all the speakers for giving a broader perspective to me and to the audience. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Ananya, thank you so much. I would also like to take this opportunity. The GCPIT will be hosting summit in Livingstone, Zambia. I've gotten all the speakers, their contacts. Would be happy to have you gracing the occasion. Jonathan, would be great to have you speaking at the summit in Livingstone, Zambia on sustainable media publishing. It's also happening on the 8th of March, while we're celebrating International Women's Day, whereby I think the society and the world celebrates women, but not really enabling an environment or empowering them as entrepreneurs. So I'll be getting in touch with all of you around speakers. We're looking for speakers to be speaking at the summit in 2024. Thank you so much. Ananya, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.